On a lighter note, there's nothing funnier at times than liturgical flub-ups. And as Richard announced very well, the first reading from the prophet Malachi, I couldn't help but remember being in the seminary, and at the time the practice was second-year students would be instituted in the ministry of lector as an official step to holy orders. So thereafter, the new lectors would take turns on Sundays. So with this particular Sunday, indeed this one reading for the first time in his alb with great solemnity proclaimed, a reading from the book of Malachi. I'm sure he's never forgotten it. I haven't, no one has. Now, to be a little serious. Perhaps many of us took piano lessons or another musical instrument in our growing years. Maybe a fair number of us, but how many ended up playing in a symphony orchestra? Maybe we took voice or dance lessons, but did we end up singing and dancing on a Broadway stage? How many went out for a sport or two in our formative years, but did we ever get drafted by a major league or qualify to play in a Masters golf tournament? Indeed, we all know what it is to do something adequately, to get by, maybe to satisfy the persons who thought it was good for us to take up these practices. But we also know that true excellence in these or any endeavors takes a lot more skill, determination, and effort than at times we are perhaps able or willing to give. Indeed, we as human people are often content to do the minimal, to pass, but not always driven to excel at some of the things we pursue. But this is precisely the point of Jesus in today's gospel. Indeed, by using the example of what are the mediocre servants, those who fulfill everything that's asked of them, but nothing more, he labels them unprofitable, which is hardly a compliment. But Jesus is using this analogy to talk about discipleship. That is the task of cultivating the necessary discipline it takes to continually learn the meaning of his teachings and then to try to better put them into practice in our day-to-day lives. Clearly, Jesus is calling us not to minimalism when it comes to our belief and practice as his followers, but rather to always strive for excellence. Yet to avoid minimalism in discipleship, we have to prioritize it. And sadly, we know that's not always the prevailing approach among us as Catholics. Indeed, we can never content ourselves to be Cape Catholics and expect then that we are somehow living in a manner which fulfills the call Jesus is in truth giving us as his disciples. And in this case, CAPE doesn't refer to our geographical location. Rather, it's an old acronym for Christmas, Ashes, Palms, and Easter. For that is an erroneous response to the question of what is the least I have to do in order to get to heaven. And that should be obvious, because Jesus did not say it would be nice if we celebrated and received the Eucharist in his memory from time to time. Rather, in fact, he explicitly commanded us to do so. And so since the beginning, we have understood that this is always to be done on that one day of the week that should be dedicated primarily to him as the giver of all time and the holder of eternity, thus properly called the Lord's Day or Sunday, the day of his resurrection. To do less than that without serious cause or legitimate excuse has been and still is properly understood to be sinful. Yet we cannot confine our faith in Jesus and the applications of his teachings only to Sunday. Rather, our Sunday worship is meant to strengthen, renew, re-energize us to put the gospel message into practice during the week as we find ways not only to love God by our daily prayer and praise of him, but to love others as we love ourselves, loving them by words and deeds of kindness, sincere compassion, and authentic charity, especially toward any we may see are in trouble or need. So let us be clear that Jesus is teaching in this parable that we should never be content just to show up at church once in a while, but rather, so long as we are able to be here each Sunday, and we can't check our faith at the doors as we leave each week, content to simply avoid doing anything seriously wrong. Rather, he's asking us to put that faith into practice by blessing the lives of others in good deeds done on their behalf or for their benefit, whenever we see the opportunity to do so before us. This is how we are to bear witness to Christ, not in weekly worship alone, not in good works alone, but by worship and works as the essential core of our lives as Christian believers. So this is the call issued to each of the baptized, as is evident from this very simple but very important gospel passage. So lest we deserve to be labeled unprofitable, let us never content ourselves to simply get a C in discipleship, but instead, never resting on the sacramental certificates we accumulate or deluding ourselves that we can get on by doing the minimal while presuming God's mercy. Rather, instead, let us always be trying to study to learn more, to pray frequently, to worship regularly, and do good works for as long as we are possibly able, for it is then that we will deserve an A in discipleship, awarded not by any earthly authority, but rather by the Lord himself, who upon our arrival at his kingdom's gate will declare, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter in and share your master's joy."